Hi, everyone. Happy New Year's, and thank you, Roshi Al, for inviting me to speak today. Um, Al asked me to give a quick introduction on myself. So I'm Berry Crawford. Um, I've been practicing Zen since, I became interested in Zen probably around 1989, 1990, but I didn't get to sit with other people until around 1991. And then in 1992, I sat my first Eshin, and that's kind of when I really got serious with my practice. So I've been practicing largely since then. I guess it's, you know, over 30 years, which is crazy to think of. And, I lived for a year at a monastery in California, like a Soto Zen monastery. Um, I practiced in Charlotte Joko Beck's lineage for a while. I took a couple years off when we started having kids. I told myself I didn't have time, which I think in retrospect, I should have made time because I noticed a huge difference when I was, and by practicing I mean sitting every day. Once I got started with the practicing, once you start viewing the world through those lenses, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. So it's not like I stopped practicing, but I stopped sitting for a couple of years, and I really noticed a difference in just kind of how my life went and how reactive I was to everything, which wasn't great timing with having babies and toddlers. So I've worked, in recent years, I've worked with two different lineages. One is the Clear Mind Zen, and I got ordained and given teaching permission to John Shoji Sorenson. And then for the last 6 years or so, I was working with Russell, Al's student, on the White Plum koan curriculum, and I completed it. You never really complete it, but I got to the end of it this year and got teaching permission in this lineage too. As far as work, I'm a software engineer. I work as a programmer, but I'm doing a kind of a gradual. I decided to do a gradual transition. I'm going to look to be a therapist in California, so I've started that process. Anyway, so that's a little bit about me. The topic of my talk today is the 10 grave precepts. And I've noticed there's a few people here online who have worked with me, so none of this will be new to them. But this is kind of be a discussion on how I approach the precepts, and partially how I've how I took them on, and partially how I work with students, and also how people have worked on them with me. And when I work with the precepts, for every precept, I kind of ask 5 questions. The first question is like, how have I broken this precept? And that's it's not if, it's how, because every one of these precepts it's not possible to live a normal human life and not break each of the precepts. And so I ask you, how do I break it? And then I ask, like, how habitual is the breaking of it? I think it's important to realize, bring to mind when the breaking of the precept is just something that just kind of happens, right? It's like we didn't plan to do it, becomes a habit. And the reason to notice that is the more we, in my opinion at least, the more we notice when we're doing something habitually, especially when we notice it repeatedly over time, the better chance we have of kind of catching ourselves in the act, and maybe having an opportunity to invoke some volitional behavior at that point, and maybe not breaking it if it doesn't make sense at that time. And then I ask, how does it hurt me? How does it make me suffer? And then more importantly, how does it make other people suffer? What kind of taking an inventory of that. And then, like, what was my motivation for breaking it? Even if it was a subconscious motivation, like, what was the chain of kind of cognitive and mental activity that led to it being broken, right? So that's the framework I look at it in. So now I'll look at the individual precepts. The first one is, I vow not to kill. And then the positive take on it is I vow to nurture and support life. So this is the gold standard of an example of a precept that we can't not break, right? Because if we're living, we're at a minimum we're eating other creatures. Even if we're vegans, we're eating other plants, and and anyone who's done any gardening, how many kind of things you kill, just the process of tilling soil, and fighting fungus, fighting bugs. Even if you do organic treatments, I mean, you're still killing things, right? Just tilling an area of soil, you're killing bugs, you're killing worms. You're taking out the natural plants that would normally be there, so they don't get to survive. Every time, being a human, being a person in a first world, kind of like highly industrialized, highly militarized society, whether I like it or not, just participating and enjoying the spoils of, being a middle class person in a first world country. I mean, lots of things are having to die on my behalf just so I can have kind of incrementally more comfort. I think it's important to recognize that. And, one example is, there's a store about 30 minutes away from me, and I could walk there, but I rarely do, because, I'm very busy and I consider time a resource. And so I drive there, but every time I drive there, more things are being hurt and killed than if I'd walked. I'm making that decision. And then, how does it affect me? Well, I feel crappy. I don't like killing things. It's not a great feeling. How does it hurt other things? Things don't like to die. So, that's not great for the things that are getting killed. Is it habitual? Like, yeah, of course. Like, the example of getting in the car and driving. I it's usually not something like, say, oh, should I drive today? No, I just get in the car and go, because that's just what I do. It's part of my habitual behaviors. And I mean, even like things I eat, like, so there's this idea of a trophic level. Things start as plants, and then there's things that eat the plants, and then there's things that eat the things that eat the plants. And every time you kind of go up those trophic levels, 90% of the energy is lost, right? And so every time you go up a level, 10 times more things need to die. So, I was a vegan for like almost 2 decades, and then I married a meat eater, and just after like 10 years of that, I eventually slowly started eating dairy and meat and stuff. But still, like, overall, I try to minimize how many animals or animal products I eat, because I kind of still have those kind of vegan feelings. But sometimes, if I go to a restaurant and there's, something looks yummy, especially if it's like Mexican or Vietnamese or something, I'll get a meat dish, and I'll just kind of do it without even considering it. It's like habitual. So what's my motivation for breaking this precept? And so, like, let's take the example where I choose to drive, instead of getting in the car, instead of walking. Well, because if I walked, I'd lose basically an hour to an hour and a half of my day. Or if I drive, I lose like 5 minutes of my day. And, and being able to have extra time to do what I want feels nice, right? Having, if I lost an hour of my day, just for the traveling, that would cause me stress. I'm generally highly oversubscribed, with all the things I do in my life and work. Losing an hour is a big deal, so that would feel crappy. So if I kind of break it down to its kind of atomic part, my motivation is because I break the precept to feel good. Feeling good is often a mental representation of something that's going to help me survive, right? So from my subconscious's point of view, like I want to feel good because it's a proxy for doing something that my subconscious thinks is going to help me survive. My subconscious often makes a wrong determination on that, but it kind of views the world in a broad, abstract brush. Oh, and one thing I wanted to say about this precept is, you can also look at them from the positive perspective, and the positive one is I vow to nurture and support life, and I'm life, right? And so, I think working on this precept is an opportunity to take a moment and say, like, am I optimizing my own health and my own life? For example, I'm a bit overweight and it affects my blood pressure. I'm probably taking years off my life by not being able to get my weight down to where it should be. I exercise pretty good, but not as much as I should. I'm definitely maybe don't eat as well as I could. Probably don't go to the doctor as often as I should. I had a pretty bad eye situation April this last year, and around September this year, it became obvious I needed to start or maybe it was even like August. They told me, wait, I'm gonna have to start getting these like injections in my eye to fix my retina. And I put that off because that didn't sound super fun. I get to do it tomorrow. I'm finally going to do it. But so these are examples of, by taking an inventory of this precept, I'm able to come to a recognition like, oh, I'm not supporting my life as well as I could. I think especially for guys where we tend to avoid medical stuff, this is a good inflection point to think about where we're maybe not nurturing our lives as well as we could. And and we're not just doing it for ourselves. I mean, I have children, I have kids, I have a wife, I have friends and students and everything. And if I take care of myself, I'm more likely to be there for them at all, or if being there for them as good as I could be. All right, so the next precept, I will not take what is not given. So this precept can be like things, right? I can't remember the last time I've actually stole something. I think I was a kid. I remember there's this country store near my house, and I'd always go up there and buy some candy and stuff. And just one day I just took a piece of candy, like these smokeless cigarettes, candy cigarettes, and I got caught, and they had to call my parents. And I remember I was so humiliated, and but I'm not much a stealer. Like I've never overall, like I don't even feel comfortable like trying to grape at the grocery store, but it's not just things, it's taking resources in general, right? So like let's say one of my I have a choice of spending some quality time with one of my daughters or working a little bit more, and I mean, she needs some of my time. This is part of like me being a parent. I need to be there for my kids. But if I take more time to work on, a work project or a Dharma project or something, then I'm stealing my time from her. So I think it helps to look at it from that perspective. And the positive is respecting the possessions of others. I remember like I dinged someone's car in a garage once, and I wrote him a note, and it cost a lot of money. But I didn't. But like not taking care of that would have been stealing from them. And so so it felt right to do it. How does it hurt other people? Obviously, people don't want their stuff taken or damaged. It hurts me by when I do catch myself not stealing resources, so to speak. It feels crappy. It feels out of alignment with my values. Habitual, absolutely. When an example of when I'm working too much and not, stealing time away from my family or whatever. I catch myself. It feels horrible. So I don't like that, obviously. And then it's very habitual. What's my motivation for doing it? Well, when I feel pressure to get stuff done, or or do things for myself, and when I successfully do that, that pressure is relieved, which feels good. When I, like, let's say, I have a work project that's due, and I'm a couple days late for it. I have the kind of background, like subtle pressure to get done. That's aversive feeling, and so so maybe I'm taking time away from my daughter or something, and that. So I'm trying to avoid feeling bad, and I'm trying to feel good by having the resources for myself that I want. And so it comes down to feeling good and not wanting to feel bad. All right. So the next precept, I vow not to misuse sexuality and intimacy. So the original one is for monks is just don't have sex, right? And then for lay people, not to misuse sexuality. But I really like to throw an intimacy there because maybe just for me, because this was not really like for different people, different precepts are going to be more or less juicy. For some people, misusing sexuality is like the big problem in their life. Abusing pornography or infidelity. So many possibilities of misuse there. It wasn't really a big juicy one for me. So I really like to kind of expand it and like kind of intimacy, both non-romantic and just general intimacy with people in general. And so an example of how I tend to break this one is if my wife and I, we have a kind of little bickering, which is less and less as we've grown older, or maybe as I become less of a problem. We but if we bicker, like I'll feel like a sense of distance from her, right? And so I will and so what I'll do is like kind of almost as a punishment, is like I'll withhold my intimacy, like curt, kind of just kind of gray rock her a little bit, like curt, like flat tone answers, maybe not even looking at her, I often don't even notice I'm doing it until I kind of catch myself, but I'm withholding intimacy almost as like I didn't like what you did, so here's the punishment, or here's my way of communicating this to you that I'm upset, but it's not cool, right? That's not a good way to treat someone you love, and is it habitual? Absolutely. I often don't do it on purpose. I don't think I've ever done it on purpose. I just catch myself doing it. Why do I do it? Because it's cathartic to communicate that I'm upset, or that I'm or I want her behavior to change or whatever as I perceive it. So my motivation there is I'm trying to, like, whatever she did that upset me, I didn't like it, that felt bad, and I think I'm trying to like fix that indirectly by withholding intimacy. Sometimes it's just very subtle, like it doesn't have to be a big thing, but the motivation is I'm trying to make myself feel better, right? So far we're 3 for 3 out of our motivation for breaking these precepts is trying to feel better, and trying to avoid feeling bad. All right. So the next one is avoid from false speech. The positive take on is vowing to be honest. When I first went through the precepts, this was a big one for me. I didn't do a lot of big lies, but I was, when I started paying attention, I was horrified at how many white lies I would tell. Like, I'd made plans 2 weeks ago, but when it got to the plan time, I was like, I don't want to leave my house, and like whenever I make plans, I never take my future self into consideration, or I'm willing to sacrifice my future self. But I get there and I was like, yeah, I don't feel like playing poker tonight. This sounds like a nightmare. But so I may be like, oh, hey, I have too much work. I can't make it. But the truth is I didn't have work. I just didn't want to do it. Right? That's a lie. Or maybe I procrastinated something at work, and I talked to a stakeholder who needs the work output, and I'm like, oh, I'm almost done. Well, the truth is I didn't even start it, and I'm gonna have to work all night. And I just was really horrified at how many little micro lies I would tell every day. And since then, I really try not to lie. I almost really never lie, because it just feels horrible. But this is also a precept that sometimes you just gotta break. I mean, the classic example is it's World War II Germany. You're hiding a Jewish family in your basement. The Nazis come by. Have you seen any Jews? No, I haven't. You're lying. But that's an example of like, sometimes it's okay to lie. Sometimes it's necessary. But I think a lot of times it just comes down to whether is it volitional or is it habitual? Like, I think if you're really paying attention and noticing when you do it habitually, I think people can go really long periods of time with not being required to kind of wholesomely tell a lie. I think we can get rid of 99% of our lies if we just kind of be less habitual and more purposeful in our lives. So the next one is the fifth precept. Traditionally, if you actually look at the history of this precept, it was originally don't sell wine. They didn't want, these were originally made for monks. And they didn't want monks to sell wine. So apparently there was a big problem with monks trying to make a living by selling wine. Probably rice wine at the time. But then it morphed into don't drink wine. And a lot of times in, American Zen centers, they'll kind of be a gloss on it like, don't engage in intoxicating thinking or something like that, right? How I like to generalize this precept and work with it is escapism. What are you doing to avoid something that's aversive, or what are you doing, or are you kind of excessively heading towards pleasure? So some people, it just comes down to literally wine or intoxicants or drugs. They're doing it to feel better, right? Or they're doing it to avoid feeling bad. Like, it sounds silly, but a big source of escapism for me is playing chess. Like, I do a lot of like intellectually draining and tiring things, and take a little break and just kind of mindlessly playing chess. Like, not even trying to win, but just taking a break. I probably do that between 1 to 10 times a day. I'll play a chess game, online. Or I've started writing this book on science of Zen, and it feels good to write this book. I'm enjoying it. It's something, I studied it. I mean, I did like 5 years of research, or probably 6 years at this point. Finally, like a month and a half ago, I sat down and started writing it, and it's been very enjoyable to write it. It's a little stressful at the same time, but very enjoyable. And my work productivity's gone downhill considerably during that time. So what I'm doing is I've caught myself just like habitually diving into this book at the expense of I've probably done less chores around the house. I'm definitely, my work productivity's gone down. But I'm chasing the dopamine high of like working on this book. And so this would be another example of a precept that sometimes you just makes sense to break, right? Some people use marijuana for medicine, right? It helps them sleep, or maybe they have anxiety disorder and can help them. So used kind of like from the perspective of medicine, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? But of course, that can easily, merge into escapism and overuse. Like the example I gave, where I do a lot of intellectually taxing things, and one thing I've learned about my study of neuroscience is to our frontal brains, where we're using logic and problem solving. They're very exhausting to use, right? It's like if you do it too much, it very quickly becomes an aversive experience. And sometimes when I catch myself, like, okay, I need a break. That it's not necessarily a bad thing. So I mean, sometimes it makes sense to like give yourself a little escapism, or give yourself a little reward. Like I love Vietnamese food. And yesterday I went with some friends to get Vietnamese food. It was great to have that little escapist break. Chasing pleasure, but there's huge consequences of doing it too much. You avoid things that you're supposed to be doing. If you're having, if you have emotional or psychological issues and you're not dealing with them or just being present with them and allowing them to resolve, or you're not maybe working with a therapist when you should, and you're just escaping from them. I mean, that's doing nobody a favor, either yourself or other people. So I mean, escapism has all sorts of issues. And sometimes, like, I find paying bills really unpleasant for some reason, even if we have plenty of money to do it. So sometimes, like I'll be like 2 or 3 days paying on a bill for no reason other than I just didn't want to do it. Like, we had the money, I just didn't want to deal with the like aversiveness of dealing with it, which is ridiculous. All right. So the next precept is not to slander, not to talk bad about people. So this would be, so the situation where, this precept needs to be broke. Like, let's say you know someone who's victimizing or harming someone else. Like, you kind of have to break this precept to, like, talk to other people and warn them about the situation. Right? But I think you can draw the line of when it's bad is kind of when you're doing it kind of for your own means, right? When, like, you're doing it to feel good, like you're doing it because it's cathartic, or it's in some benefit of yours, and obviously it's bad for other people because it's no one wants to have crap talked about them. If they find out, they're going to be upset. It's bad for me because it's out of when I catch myself doing it, it's out of alignment with my values, so it's aversive to notice myself doing it. If someone finds out I'm talking about them, they'll lose their trust in me. It'll damage the relationship, so it hurts me in that way. Is it habitual? Absolutely. People I and other people, we catch ourselves all the time, just kind of doing this habitually, and a lot of times, when two people are talking badly about another person, they're bonding in the process. So, they're, and so a lot of times you'll just want, like, oh, this person wants to talk bad about another person with me. That means they're accepting me. We're a team against these other people. I mean, that feels good, right? And again, when people break this precept, it comes down to because they want to feel good, and they want to avoid feeling bad. So then the next precept is kind of very tied to this one. I vow not to praise self at the expense of others. And again, this is a precept kind of you need to break. You're at a job interview, and they ask you why are you the person for this job? Well, you need to promote yourself, and which kind of implicitly you're comparing yourself to other people that may not have these attributes that you're praising in yourself. So sometimes you're just going to have to break this precept. Do I do it habitually? Sure, all the time. How does it hurt myself? Well, it feels out of alignment with my values, so it doesn't feel good. Or people find out that I'm doing it, and it makes me look bad. Or people see me doing it in real time, and they're kind of like, "What's wrong with this person? Why are they talking crap?" Like, I have one friend, one of my better friends, but he's always talking bad about this one particular guy, and actually he kind of does a lot with a lot of people, which makes me think like he probably does it to me too. And I have to say it's maybe kept me from being as close with him as I could be, because I'm like this is a guy who talks bad about a lot of people, and it kind of makes me feel a little uncomfortable with the friendship. I mean, still want a good friend, but it could be a better friendship if he didn't do it as much. And I bring it up not so much to tell him how to live his life, but in seeing him do it, I know that I'm capable of this too. And so if I do it, it's going to hurt hurt my relationship with other people, and it makes me feel bad. Why do I do it? Because it's cathartic, or it makes me feel good. So far we're 8 out of 8 or 7 out of 7 precepts that we do because the underlying need to wanting to feel good and avoid feeling bad. All right, the next one, not to be greedy or stingy. San Francisco Zen Center says avaricious, which I had to look that up. It means greedy or stingy. Basically it's any distribution of resources, where you're taking more for yourself. And why? Because it feels good, right? When, people, we're kind of really hardwired to want more for ourselves than other people or more for our family. Can you go through life without breaking this precept? Of course not. I want to pay as less taxes as I can, so there's more money for me and my family, right? And so it would just be impossible to, or I'm not giving away all my possessions because that just wouldn't make sense. Like you have to keep things. You have to take. You kind of have to fight to take your share of resources in this world. When does it become a problem? I think it comes back to habituality again. When it's out of control, you're not doing it. You're doing it kind of for just to feel good and not feel bad, and not just for practical reasons. That's when you can enter into, are you actually breaking this precept for the wrong reason? The next one is not to harbor ill will or harbor anger. And I really like the wording that a lot of places use for this precept, which is to harbor ill will, right? Because if it's like, I will not be angry, which is how some places state it, I mean, that's kind of a unreasonable expectation of people. Because generally, I've studied the neuroscience of this as part of my research, and 9 times out of 10, the initial anger is something completely out of your volitional control, right? Something happens, and it's usually two things tend to make humans angry. One is a blocked goal, and the other is people breaking social rules as you define, as an individual will define them. They're not being fair. They're being rude. They're not using their blinker on the freeway. They ran the red light. It's like, so like when we see people breaking what we define as social rules, that really angers us. Or we have a plan that we want to accomplish, like I want to get to this event on time, but I keep hitting red lights, so I'm going to start feeling little degrees of irritation. And irritation is basically like baby anger, right? These things just happen automatically. We can't control them. However, beyond the initial eruption of irritation or frustration or anger, we absolutely have the opportunity for volition, for non-habitual ways of being, because what will happen is, like, the event will happen that makes us angry, but then, like, and that was all subconscious, but at that point, the self, the narrative self, gets in and starts stewing on it and ruminating and like, yeah, he shouldn't have done that. How dare he? Blah blah blah. And that's and that becomes really self-perpetuating, where our illusionary sense of self grabs hold of it, harbors it, and runs with it. And so, I think, as our goal as practitioners is to notice. First of all, not beat ourselves up when we have our initial anger, because again, we don't have any control over it. It's just a unconscious process. But when we notice ourselves kind of ruminating and holding on to anger, like, that's the entry point for practice. Notice when we're harboring it. All right, so the last precept here. How are we doing on time? The last precept here is not to. So it's. The traditional is not to disparage the tree treasures. I don't know about you guys, but I don't walk around talking crap about Buddha, Dharma, or Sangha that much. So this is not really a precept that I was ever kind of juicy for me, and it never really was juicy for anyone I've worked with. So kind of how I've merged to work with this precept is how not to misuse the three treasures, how not to misuse practice. And like, a classic example for me was in my early years of practice, being a young man, I wanted people to perceive me as a badass, advanced Zen practitioner. And so I'd sit through all sorts of pain. I'd sometimes sit through Kenyan at Sesshin. It was just really important to me to be perceived as like an advanced Zen practitioner. It's because I wanted that. Again, this was all subconscious. I didn't realize I was necessarily doing this, but I wanted that social approval. Or another way you can misuse practice is for some people, when they sit, they can get into these really kind of peaceful, kind of shamatha, tranquility mind states, and that can almost feel like a drug sometimes. It just feels so good, especially if you spend a lot of your life kind of revved up from anxiety. When you finally kind of get some respite from it through practice, just it can feel so good. I mean, you could actually start using meditation as a drug, and kind of almost as escapism. Certainly, you can, as someone who's taken steps to being a teacher, I'm constantly trying to be alert of myself. Am I making this about myself at all? Like is a student not doing something? Am I putting my own agenda into it? And so I'm constantly alert for like not putting my own agenda into any Dharma relationship I have, like just trying to be there purely as an act of service. Why do I break this precept again? Because I'm trying to feel good and trying to avoid feel bad. And so kind of wrap this up. The reason I like to look at what the motivation is for each of these precepts is because it really starts painting a picture of how much the underlying drive to feel good and avoid feeling bad, or just to survive, or in feeling good and feeling bad, those are rewards and punishments that our subconscious uses to like nudge us in directions that it thinks is conducive to survival, like eating a lot of cake. Your subconscious thinks like, oh, fats and sugars are really rare, we should eat as much as we can when we get the opportunity, right? But obviously that's not the world we live in anymore. So the subconscious makes bad decisions all the time about. But and so the output of all these precepts, aside from like the real benefit of taking inventory, like how am I being a jerk and how could I be less of a jerk? I mean, that's hugely advantageous, especially for people new to practice. I think behavioral modification, living more wholesomely, is the low-hanging fruit of practice. It's the thing that you can do that makes the biggest, quickest difference in someone's life. So I mean, a focus on precepts, I think, is a great kind of introduction to practice. And but seeing the pattern of like, oh wow, I'm really a slave to feeling good and feeling bad in ways that it was so ubiquitous I didn't even notice. I mean, to me, that's a tremendously important thing to notice about our lives, and puts us in a position to be more purposeful and volitional in life and less habitual, which is, gets us 99% of the way there as far as living a more awake and wholesome life. All right, so that's my talk. Do we do question and answers with this group?
Sure. Yeah, if anyone has a question or an observation, I can't really see you raising your hand, so.
I have 3 or 4, maybe 5 things. Barry's been pretty humble about this. He's a sensei in the Open Mind lineage, and actually a Roshi in the Clear Mind lineage. So that's happened this summer. A couple of interesting add-ons, Barry, maybe, is if he were to ask, how does this precept influence society if people do it? In other words, there's this incremental benefit to society if we observe these precepts individually, and that kind of opens up just a different kind of energetic relationship we have. Is how does society become better because we do this? Mm-hmm. And then the one other thing, have you thought about the relationship of causes and conditions I kind of like avoiding blame casting whenever I can, even towards myself.
Hmm.
And so if we look at the causes and conditions and sort of ask the question, well, how did I get here? And then what are the right, or what tools or insights help me to um, change the way that I've levied importance on the pieces and parts that got me here.
Yeah, it makes
Those are the
tons of
things.
sense. Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that would be its own valuable in its own reward. It is also very helpful in noticing the habitual nature of our behaviors too. I think whenever you're able to step back and look at processes objectively, I think it's just inherently beneficial and also is helpful in seeing where we're just along for the ride and not maybe being as purposeful as we can. Yeah, so thank you so much.
Yeah, Barry, one thing I noticed from what you were saying, maybe you could comment a little more on this, is uh, first of all, I enjoyed the way you broke it down or broke the awareness of the precepts down, which it seems to me is a real mindfulness activity. So, can you say anything about the when you start turning your attention towards something like that? What do you find happens uh, to your relationship to something that you might not have thought that much about before?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, like for me, I usually I usually work backwards from an emotional reaction to something, or that. But usually, I mean, that's like the most effective way for me personally is, and so like I'll have an emotional reaction, and I'll usually take that as an opportunity to kind of like step out of my story, my narrative, and okay, well, what's going on here? And just by doing that, as Dogen would say, taking that backward step and shining the light inwards, but just okay, I'm going to stop and I'm going to pay attention. Um, like that kind of just invokes, like on its own, awareness of patterns that are getting you there. Does that answer your question? Does that give
Yeah,
you?
and one thing that I've found over the years is that something that appears to be simple, like don't lie or don't kill things, when you start looking at it carefully, you realize there's like an entire universe there.
Yeah,
I don't know if you
absolutely.
find that or not.
Yeah, and the analogy I often use for people is like marketers, they have these, they understand how our perceptions work and our cognition works, and so the way they lay out a grocery store or the way they lay out a web page is designed to manipulate our behavior, by putting like milk and bread in the back and candy bars and expensive stuff in the front that we have to walk through to get to the stuff we need. Like it affects our shopping behavior. Like you can measure it, right? Even if we don't think it's affecting us, guarantee you it is. I guarantee you it affects me in ways I don't notice. Or the way a website's designed, where like let's say I want to like unsubscribe from a mail, so I click and it takes me to a website, and there's this giant orange button saying like pause emails for 30 days, and then under it's this like little gray, barely visible unsubscribe, which was really my goal there. But the way human perception works, we like, oh, big orange, clicky clicky, and like so like, but when you learn both of those facts about how perception works and how things are trying to manipulate us, we're a lot less likely to get caught in the future. And so speaking to what you said, like when you're able to be mindful and you actually see all the complex, cognitive and emotional processes that are leading to something as simple as not lying, um, when they get, especially if you do it repeatedly, if you, it, just that pattern coming up again, it's like, aha, I've seen this before, and that's a trigger for mindful, to be mindful as well. Right.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, Barry, thank you very much for your talk.
Hi,
If
Mike.
one observation is like the extent to which the precepts are like a list of addictions,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that, like, engaging in the addiction brings me pleasure short term.
Yep.
But as I keep doing it, I realize I'm trapped in an addiction. And then paradoxically, it's not making me feel good, it's making me feel terrible.
Absolutely.
And
Yep.
so it's sort of like you're motivated by wanting to feel good, but it's you have a little more perspective on feeling good. It's not make me
Uh-huh.
feel good in the next 30 seconds.
Right.
It's make me feel good for the next 30 years.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's a. I'm gonna break a precept and steal that from you and borrow it. Adopt that. Yeah.
I probably stole it from one of the inmates that I used to work with the precepts on.
Yeah. No,
They're
that's
very
that's
perceptive guys.
yeah. That's a brilliant observation. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, and and it's to kind of tie it to neuroscience, which I probably do too much, especially these days where it's so much on my mind. That a lot of times there's a war between kind of the more ancient parts of our brain, which is like feel good, like sugar and sweet is so rare in the world. Eat as much of it as you can, right? There's that kind of the dopamine driven kind of midbrain, very ancient mechanisms, and every single vertebrae has this machinery in the brain. And then our more kind of recent evolutionary developed kind of neocortex, especially in humans and primates and stuff, where we can kind of analyze things more analytically. Oftentimes it's a war between these two parts of our brain. It's like cake is delicious versus I need to lose weight, or I'm supposed to have dinner later with my friend and I don't want to get, and so and so you can kind of see a lot of the precepts, especially in the way you're framing it as an addiction to pleasure. Um, um, I heard a meow meow. Especially as framing it that way, it's a lot of the precepts could be seen as the war between the ancient feel good right now part of our brain, and then kind of the more let's look at this analytically, and what are my values, what are the benefits to future me, versus not giving in to present me, which is definitely something I could work on more. Thank you.
So another thing that came up just as I was listening was the nature of us to look at breaking as a dualistic perspective. I'm either breaking or I'm not breaking. I'm either good or bad,
Mm-hmm.
and creating a judgment or a value about it instead of looking at it as a way to adjust and
Jennifer wants to see your
benefit
kitty,
the
by the
world.
way. Sorry.
I know they don't pick up well.
I apologize for interrupting. Yeah, that's yeah, that's a great point. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll just have one more comment here.
Yeah, hi, Barry. Thank you so much for sharing yourself with us this morning. And I just want to say a thank you. I thought your 5 questions were a really brilliant little approach to the precepts, and I know I'm gonna, that'll stick with me, and it'll be very helpful. And I also wanted to thank you for the thought about the intoxicants, as the broader question being, what do I do to escape?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really, that's for me, it's a very valuable way of looking at that precept. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot for showing up, Barry. I know it's kind of early where you are. He didn't say he's in California, so 3 hours early. I'll just make a quick announcement that we do still have a couple spots available for the Costa Rica trip we're doing at the beginning of March. If anyone wants information on that, you can let us know. And those of you who are in Melbourne, we'll be doing a group koan workshop. I think it's the 25th is the Saturday, 24th or 25th of January, for those of you who are here in Melbourne. Otherwise, have a great afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Barry. Really good. Thank you. Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you so much for participating.